I'd like to start this morning by saying welcome to the University of Illinois at Chicago, Chicago's premier public, state or not so state-funded university. And to welcome us today to UIC and to the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Marya Shechtman, Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and a professor of philosophy. Marya is a founding member of UIC's Laboratory of Integrated Neuroscience. She received her PhD in philosophy from Harvard in 1988 and arrived at UIC the same year. She's an internationally renowned scholar of philosophy who specializes in questions of personal identity with special attention to the connection between ethical and metaphysical identity questions. That's a job description many of us would really like. And she has testified to the Presidential Commission on Bioethics on issues related to identity and medical interventions. Professor Shechtman is the author of The Constitution of Selves, Staying Alive, Personal Identity, Practical Concerns, and The Unity of a Life. She's a very prolific scholar and is also the dean who deals with interdisciplinary subjects, which, to say the least, the Freshwater Lab figures under. So please join me in welcoming Associate Dean Shechtman to the podium.
So thank you, Rachel, and hello, welcome, good morning. Welcome to the 2017 Untrouble the Waters Freshwater Lab Summit. And it's really a great pleasure and honor to be here to celebrate the convening of mayors, leaders, researchers, and community members who have gathered together to envision new and positive ways forward for our Great Lakes, which the Sierra Club calls the region's economic, ecological, and spiritual lifeblood and our national treasure. We're very thankful for the support of the McDougall Family Foundation, the Mott Foundation, and the Alliance for the Great Lakes, to all of our wonderful speakers and participants, and especially to the following mayors for their partnership in this summit. So the mayors are Paula Hicks Hudson, Toledo, Ohio; Marcus Muhammad, Benton Harbor, Michigan; John Dickert, Racine, Wisconsin; Karen Freeman Wilson of Gary, Indiana; Tom Barrett, Milwaukee, Wisconsin; and former Mayor Hillard Hampton, Inkster, Michigan. So thank you very much. And I, of course, also want to take this opportunity to recognize the important work of our own Rachel Haverlock, humanities professor in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and director of UIC's Freshwater Lab, as most of you know. So the Freshwater Lab explores social and human issues related to water, energy, and natural resources in the Great Lakes region. And it's unique because it's the first such research initiative that's rooted in the humanities and social sciences, distinguishing it from other Great Lakes centers, which are more based in science and engineering disciplines. And of course, I think you all know we need all of the above. Professor Haverlock is the author of the book River Jordan, The Mythology of a Dividing Line, which examines the Jordan as a major political and symbolic border and explores how the complex religious and mythological representations of the river have shaped current conflict in the Middle East. It's just a beautiful example of how the humanities can be relevant and helpful to things that matter to all of us. Her research has been supported by the U.S. Department of State, the Mellon Foundation, and the University of Cambridge Center for the Arts. So we're all here today to ensure the future of our Great Lakes, that it's planned, protected, and shored up to provide sustainable community access to healthy water systems for generations to come. Because the Great Lakes have a relative abundance, approximately 21% of the world's surface freshwater, and a history of successful cross-border management, the region has the potential to be the world's leading site of innovative approaches to water issues. So this is a summit of critical importance because, as Rachel knows better than most, many of the world's current conflicts have resource issues at their core, and increasingly the resource at issue is water. Rachel nicely outlines the need to study the Great Lakes issues right now when she says, with algae blooms compromising Lake Erie, Detroit residents at risk of losing water service, Chicago running almost entirely on heavy Alberta tar sands oil, tar sand and frack gas pipelines surrounding the shores of the lakes, and drought-stricken regions near and far looking to Midwestern water stores, it's a necessary moment for a humanistic and social science-based approach to water issues. So we're very, very grateful to all of you who are here today for your willingness to give of your time, your energy, and your expertise to formulate humanistic approaches to ecological issues and to articulate scientific findings about the health and future of fresh water systems to the wider public. Your active participation in this summit is going to lead directly to dialogue, collaboration, and dissemination of research beyond the academy to communities, policymakers, and practitioners of water management at multiple scales. The Fresh Water Lab at UIC has a proven track record of bringing representatives from government, nonprofits, academia, and community organizers together, a special talent of Rachel's. And building on this record, the summit's going to continue to bridge existing organizations and expand community constituencies in the name of advancing water restoration and sustainability initiatives. Since water is, after all, a universal human need, our hope is that the partnerships and projects envisioned at this summit will lead to cross-community approaches to the management and conservation of water, benefiting communities and watersheds alike. And I have to say, from the few minutes that I had to talk to people here, I am so filled with hope and excitement and optimism. So in closing, I really want to offer my heartfelt thanks for you being here, and my best wishes of UIC and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for the good work that you're about to embark on with the Fresh Water Lab. And we need you. Have a great summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Sheckman. How's the volume? Can everybody hear? So I'm going to say my second good morning to all of you. And I'd like to start by asking you please to turn to your right and then turn to your left and introduce the people sitting around you. So say hello, say good morning. Okay, thank you, everyone. We're looking to a whole lot more of this over the next 2 days, so just wanted to start out and give you a little taste of that. All right. Welcome, everyone. You are all participants in a collective effort to govern the Great Lakes in the best interest of communities in the basin and the long-term health of the ecosystem. As inhabitants of the Great Lakes watershed, you are the experts on how best to do this. The learning involved for all of us, I think, is how untroubling our shared waters and distributing their benefits equitably can heal our region's entrenched racial divides and help us to shed our Rust Belt image. Let's remember that water causes things to rust and start calling the Great Lakes region what it is, the water belt. Then let us follow all of the corroded pipes and toxic trails where they lead most directly low-income communities and neighborhoods with majorities of people of color. Addressing this injustice represents no form of charity, because if we believe that toxins adhere to socioeconomic boundaries, then we are tragically mistaken. Together, as drinkers of Great Lakes water, we need to take back the Great Lakes. The arguments for regional control of over 20% of the world's freshwater are numerous. First of all, the federal government has shown itself hostile to America's waterways. In our case, threatening to close our region's EPA office and cut the Great Lakes restoration budget to practically zero. We cannot wait and see whether or not the lakes will actually be decimated. We must take their protection into our hands now. The beauty of this is that investment in these lakes transcends partisan lines. Nearly everyone in the basin loves these waters. Senator Debbie Stabenow advanced a bipartisan bill to secure Great Lakes funding for 1 year, and the Great Lakes governors, the majority Republican, have voiced support for the long-term health of the lakes. Since protecting the lakes is a point on which nearly everyone can agree, let's build on this to keep their benefits within the region and engage everyone, including the most disenfranchised, in managing them. The result will be improved public health and social stability for all. Secondly, global corporations have treated the lakes and their people violently. Our most acute water issues reflect this. Oil sands refineries rain down toxic black dust on waterfront communities. Chemical pesticides bleed into blue lakes and turn them neon green. Children are poisoned from their water faucets so that multinational finance can lay claim to their water sources and real estate. And meanwhile, here's my biggest foe, Nestle, the Swiss extractor of our water, profits by satisfying the most basic human need. Our region need not look like this. Mayors, community leaders, researchers, and innovators are already providing the alternatives. Instead of subsidizing the privatization of our public waters, we can invest that same money in local business. For example, instead of giving tax breaks to Nestle, how about we support small-scale beverage producers and package designers who can also help us with our growing pits of plastic bottles? Instead of seeing our precious waters go green from algae blooms, rural areas in the water belt can pioneer food production as they emerge as global centers of water reuse technologies. Abandoned factories in our post-industrial cities can get a retrofit to produce water filters, state-of-the-art pipes, and other systems that can help us weather the superstorms that climate change has brought us. In the great tradition of the Midwest labor movement, these are union jobs that help realize the plans of university research and development labs in the same neighborhoods as the factories. By investing and lifting up local expertise in environmental justice communities, we can prevent our own poisoning and collectively design the world's most viable region. So let us attend to how water both connects and divides communities. Even as everyone present in a place depends upon shared sources of water for life itself, communities are divided by access, pricing, exposure to toxins, and a voice in water allocation. Because water constitutes such a necessary public good, we need a new approach that engages everyone in the question of our water. People need to see where their water goes through clear maps of pipes and channels that redirect the flow of water and define areas of prosperity and poverty. And the allocation of water to corporations, agricultures, and municipalities needs to be publicized so that the public can weigh in on the primary beneficiaries of water resources. There's significant precedent for autonomous Great Lakes Regional Water Management. The United States and Canada's International Joint Commission has maintained peaceful, productive water sharing for over 100 years. The Great Lakes Compact gives governors and Canadian premiers the right to determine how much water is pumped outside of the basin. One of our partners in the summit, the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, provides a forum for mayors to sound a united voice on issues vital to their cities. With these precedents, we can build a governing body to determine levels of pollution released into the lakes, what entities have the right to pollute, and how water use can be to Great Lakes people's maximum benefit. The Great Lakes are a commons. I am honored and humbled to say that the leading thinkers about the water commons are in the room with us right now. So you may be very happy to learn who you introduced yourself to a few minutes ago. Organizations like FLOW, Council of Canadians, Food and Water Watch, Great Lakes Commons, Milwaukee Water Commons, Alliance for the Great Lakes, We the People of Detroit, El Vejo, and so many others are represented here. Many of them have programs underway to bring people together across boundaries of age, political party, race, class, and gender to collectively manage their water. And at the root of all these efforts rests the knowledge and the leadership of Indigenous peoples on whose land we reside and to whom we look for guidance about what it means to be a water protector. So we've got some work to do. As we embark on this work, we ask that everyone respect the speakers, the participants, and the staff. Many of the issues that we will discuss are at the forefront of political controversy and involve histories and current scenarios of exploitation. These are gravely serious matters that warrant debate, and on the grounds of a public university, we welcome informed debate. Should it ensue, then we ask that the debate be conducted among actual people and not corporate persons. Should you plan to speak on behalf of a corporation, then I ask that you identify yourself as that corporation's agent and not as an individual, so that your motivation remains clear. During the question and answer sessions, we welcome directed questions to the speakers. After the speakers have had a chance to share their knowledge with us, everyone will have the opportunity for engaged participation in tomorrow afternoon's working group sessions. We are working on the scales of neighborhood, community, city, and region, and know that all of these can be fraught sites. In the midst of so much uncertainty on the state and national level, however, we hope that everyone can look to our common fate as inhabitants of the Great Lakes Basin. The exhilarating plan, I am exhilarated myself up here, the exhilarating plan for the next 2 days is as such. This morning, we will hear addresses from Maud Barlow, National Chairperson of the Council of Canadians, and Denise Abdul-Rahman, Environmental Climate Justice Chair at the NAACP Indiana. The Freshwater Lab thanks Food and Water Watch for helping arrange Maud Barlow's keynote, and the UIC African American Cultural Center, Women's Leadership and Resource Center, and Chancellor's Committee on the Status of Blacks for supporting Denise Abdul-Rahman's address. Following a break for lunch, Freshwater Lab Senior Advisor Dr. Antonio Lopez will moderate, is that right? Okay, will moderate an environmental justice plenary with panelist Deborah Taylor, co-founder of We the People of Detroit, Dr. Yana Lambrinidou, Department of Science and Technology in Society of Virginia Tech, Kim Wasserman Nieto, Executive Director of Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and Robin Ammer, Deputy Editor of the Chicago Reader. We thank the Midwest Environmental Justice Network for their co-sponsorship of this plenary. Afterwards, we will enjoy, okay. Oh yeah, this is some places around town for lunch. We'll put it up at the end of the addresses this morning too. And then following the plenary, we will enjoy a coffee break here before an exciting panel of Great Lakes mayors moderated by Naomi Davis, president and founder of Blacks in Green. As Dean Scheckman articulated, we are deeply honored that the mayors are here with us today. Tomorrow, okay, I'm going to explain tomorrow a little bit. That's today. Okay, so tomorrow, everyone is invited to get to work in one of 6 working groups concerning water costs and the human right to water, environmental justice campaign messaging, story production, and grassroots media, oil pipelines in the Great Lakes, water delivery and lead pipes, can we be good water neighbors, culture, place, and watershed politics. And among the phenomenal projects to be discussed and beta tested in the Great Lakes Digital Storytelling Group, my longtime creative collaborator, Sharif Azat, will unveil the prototype of Freshwater Stories, the digital space that we hope will reflect the work of the Freshwater Lab and this summit and help spread the knowledge and needed action to achieve our watershed vision. Each group tomorrow will begin with a panel of leading thinkers and activists in each area. Because we have such a full agenda, I'd like to ask all of tomorrow's panelists to stand now. That's you, tomorrow's panelists. If you just take a minute to stand now. I thank you collectively for being here and for contributing so much to bringing this summit into being. So following a lunch break tomorrow, the groups will resume with a facilitated discussion aimed at producing the outline or plan of tangible, action-oriented projects to address the specific issue of the working group. In order to untrouble our waters in these troubled times, the Freshwater Lab hopes to bring people together across sectors and backgrounds to promote engagement and transformation. A very special recognition is due to Tony Anderson, founding executive director of Sacred Keeper Sustainability Lab, for helping us to design tomorrow afternoon's workshops, as well as for serving as the Environmental Justice Working Group facilitator. Heartfelt thanks to the EJ Planning Committee for envisioning this session, and to the extraordinary Ricardo Gamboa for moderating the EJ panel. We are thrilled that Bryant Williams, president of BK Environmental Industries, will be facilitating the water delivery and lead pipe session focused on comprehensive plans for lead pipe replacement. Tim Oravec, Lena Reynolds, Kathleen Blackburn, Justin Radin, and Corbin Hiddai will facilitate the other sessions. As Freshwater Lab alums and current PhD students, there is not praise enough for these amazing people who have worked so closely with me and given so much to the Freshwater Lab. We will conclude tomorrow's work with a closing ceremony led by Janie Pochel and Indigenous youth from the American Indian Center. Afterward, everyone is invited to keep the conversation going at UIC's Gallery 400, where the Earth Will Not Abide exhibit spurs further discussion about water, land, and industrial agriculture. Should you have additional questions about the proceedings, please ask someone with a Freshwater Lab button. Let me ask Freshwater Lab associates and students with buttons to stand, so everyone can see you or give a wave. And allow me to thank Edith Tovar, Lucia Whalen, Kathleen Mueller, Cecilia Villaruel, Nikki Maldonado, Desiree Bautista, Quinn Douglas, and Camilo McConnell for their numerous contributions. My gratitude to so many people abounds. Thank you to everyone in this room for making this summit happen. The generous support of the McDougall Family Foundation, the Mott Foundation, the Humanities Without Walls initiative housed at UIUC and supported by the Mellon Foundation, and the Alliance for the Great Lakes has brought Untrouble the Waters and the Freshwater Stories digital site into being. Susan Levine at the UIC Institute for the Humanities and the unmatched abilities of Associate Director Linda Vavra have nurtured the Freshwater Lab every step of the way. Freshwater Lab alum Nicole Krause is here today, helped us produce the last summit and remained active even after she was gone from UIC. The UIC Centers for Cultural Understanding and Social Change are partners in highlighting water issues on campus with the UIC Latino Cultural Center under the direction of Rosa Cabrera, a most active and treasured partner. I deeply value the support of UIC's Great Cities Institute and the mentoring of its director, Teresa Cordoba. We are very glad that Corey Nord from PKPR is here and thank him for his time and generosity. Our presence this morning reflects nearly a year of dialogue and work with 3 people in particular. Building on the water diplomacy at the Freshwater Lab's 2015 summit, Mila Marshall conceived of engaging Great Lakes mayors of color and creating another summit around this theme. Mila is a brilliant, multi-talented advocate for nature and people, and it has truly been a pleasure to work and to learn with her. Mila Kellen is a born leader, a scientist who speaks for the lakes with the most humanistic passion. Dr. Antonio Lopez was an amazing figure whom I met at the last summit, who came on at the beginning of the year as a senior consultant. He not only brought considerable expertise in planning a large-scale event, but also charged the process with the insistence that principles guide each turn of the work. Dr. Lopez is one of the leading environmental thinkers of our times, and it has been such an honor to work with him this year. In a sure sign that miracles exist, Ben Sullivan came into my office last summer to propose working for the Freshwater Lab. Not only was he absolutely correct, but that fortuitous visit allowed for this summit to develop its many dimensions. As Freshwater Lab project manager, Ben attended to every aspect of this endeavor with intelligence, diligence, and patience. I will let all of you in on the fact that Ben is graduating with a master's from the College of Urban Planning. My loss, future employers, is your gain. As many people in the room can attest, Freshwater Lab students work at the cutting edge of water policy and can invigorate existing and emerging organizations with youthful drive and energy. Assuming my professor hat for a moment, I'll say directly, hire them. Another creative dimension of the summit involves the talented folks from Ink Factory. There they are in the corner. They will be creating visual notes of our presenters today and tomorrow by synthesizing the speaker's words into images and text to visually represent the key concepts and themes of the summit. Please feel free to take pictures and share the images using the hashtag Untrouble the Waters or hashtag FWL. And tomorrow, every working group has its own hashtag, so people in the room can let the Ink Factory illustrators know what's going on, and they'll incorporate that into their work. Don't be afraid to approach them and ask questions after they're finished drawing. They are active participants in the summit. We also have Matthew Kaplan doing photography and Sarah Strand filming video. Speaking of creative, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Professor Johari Jubeir, who serves as a devoted mentor to UIC students and a productive scholar while maintaining a professional music career. He will share insight into the song, Trouble the Waters, and our desire to untrouble them. Professor Jubeir will be accompanied by someone else extremely important to me, my husband, Yuri Lane. We wish all of you a stimulating and productive Freshwater Lab Summit.
All right, so I'm here to lead us in a rallying song. When we sing together, we become each other. And the theme, Untrouble the Waters, came out of a conversation. Rachel and I have been having an intellectual relationship around the Jordan River. I write about waterways and the symbolic use of the Jordan in the African American religious experience. And so the song I'm going to lead us in comes out of the Black freedom struggle. It's a coded spiritual wade in the water that Tubman changed the words to a lot in order to direct people to freedom. So I'm not going to sing a solo. I'm going to lead us in in this collective rallying songs. And the hook, after we sing that chorus, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, we're going to sing, we need to clean up the water. And we are empowered to do so because whatever our positions are on the use of God language, I hope that we all know that it could not have been the God who gave us this beautiful planet and gave us the one common source of water, who afflicted the waters with contamination and toxins, but perhaps the demagogues of exploitation, capitalism, disenfranchisement. Those gods are responsible for the water being troubled in the ways that it is, and so we have to untrouble them. We have the power to do that, all right? So everybody stand. I'll start us off. There are a couple of verses. You'll be able to feel it and come along, and we can start clapping and popping and snapping and swaying as we do at a mass rally. That's a part of what we're doing also, all right? Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. We need to clean up the water. Say it again, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. We need to clean up the water. Now we're selling bottled water like it's going out of style. We need to clean up the water. We need to stop
My name is Desiree Batista. I am a UIC alum as well as a former freshwater lab student of Professor Haverlock. She's amazing too, as many of you know. Professor Haverlock actually changed my life by introducing me to Food and Water Watch, Jessica Fouillon, who is now my boss, but she doesn't like me to call her my boss. She likes me to call her my comrade. In private, I call her my boo. So I'm not going to bore you with my story. I'm an advocate for fresh water, obviously, right? And I, too, see Nestle as my foe. I did a project on them and their stealing of the water from the Great Lakes. Anywho, so it's my pleasure to introduce someone who I didn't even know her, and she gave me the warmest hug when I first met her earlier today. Mard Barlow is the national, I'm sorry guys, I'm blind, so just bear with me for a second, is the national chairperson of the Council of Canadians and chairs I'm so sorry. She's on the board of, no, Maude, I'm sorry, am I messing this up? Okay, I'm gonna start again. Okay, I'm trying to be sorry. Can I use your glasses? No, I'm joking, I'm joking. Okay, so Mard Barlow is the national chairperson of the Council of Canadians and chairs the board Washington-based Food and Water Watch. Got it. She is, Maud, you crossed this out. Counselor of the Hamburg-based World Future Council, is that correct? Sorry. Maud is the recipient of 14 honorary doctorates, as well as many awards, including the 2005 Right Livelihood Award, known as the Alternative Noble, and the 2011 Earth Care Award, the highest international honor of the Sierra Club. In 2008 and 2009, she served as senior advisor in water to the 63rd President of the United Nations General Assembly and was a leader in the campaign. I'm sorry, this is so bad. Water recognized as human right by the UN. She is also the author of dozens of reports as well as 18 books, including Blue Future, Protecting Water for People and the Planet Forever, which was our text for Freshwater Lab. It's amazing. And her latest, Boiling Point, Government Neglect, Corporate Abuse, and Canada Water Crisis. Again, it is my pleasure to introduce, very poorly apparently, Maude Barlow. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Desiree, very much, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Rachel, for the beautiful opening. Thank you to the music, just fabulous, touched my heart. And only a few people know how really happy we all are I am here, because I was supposed to come in last night and the plane never left Ottawa. So I went home, had some wine, calmed down, got up at the crack of dawn this morning. I mean, I was looking at the clock. You know when you have to be up for an early morning plane, so it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I've got my eye on the clock. Anyway, just thrilled to be here. We made it. So, yes. So as we gather here on this lovely campus in this great, great city, on one of the world's greatest lakes, it's important to pause and reflect for a few minutes on the crisis outside. And it's really hard sometimes for those of us who live in areas with abundant water or appearing to be abundant water. And you hear that the title of my latest book is about Canada's water crisis. Believe it or not, we have one too. But it's important for us to look at this against a backdrop of what's happening out in the world, because there really is a very real human and ecological water crisis in the world. The planet is running out of accessible fresh water. This was something we were all taught could not happen when we were children. But the UN now tells us that demand for water will increase by 55% over the next 15 years alone. By that time, water resources will meet only 60% of the demand. Now try to imagine what we're talking about here. If we think the suffering is bad now, try to imagine what we're talking about with that kind of supply and demand reality. In fact, the UN says that the water crisis could severely affect as many as 7 billion people within the next half century. The UN has been telling us until about a month ago that they were winning the war on getting access to fresh water, and it was fewer than 1 billion people who lacked access to fresh water. The World Health Organization just corrected that with a new report saying it's almost 2 billion now. So with all of the work that we're doing in so many ways, we're not catching this crisis. And 2.5 billion have no access to adequate sanitation. Close to 3 million people, mostly children under 5, die of waterborne disease every year, and more than half the hospital beds on Earth are filled with people suffering from dirty water. In fact, lack of clean water kills more children than all forms of violence together, including war. So here's the most important thing I want us to start with thinking this morning, and this is this message as we gather here, that all of these crises, from the disappearing rivers of China, over 50% of their major rivers are gone since the year 2000. They don't know where they went, they're gone. The almost fully polluted waters of India and Russia, the fact that Pakistan and Yemen, among others, we're told will be out of water by 2025. The first ever massive drought in Brazil, another country with a great water heritage. The worst drought in a century in East Africa, a parched and sinking Mexico City, and all of the human and non-human suffering that this means are all on our doorstep here in North America. They're either here now or they're coming, and it's really important that we understand, and in a way it makes us a global community in our fight for justice, and I so appreciate the notion that we're not talking about charity here, we're talking about justice. Those of us blessed to live on or near these Great Lakes have an urgent and ethical responsibility to care for them fiercely and share them justly if we're to earn the right to be able to claim to be their stewards. Now, I'm not going to tell you about the threats to the Great Lakes of climate change, industrial wastewater pollution, microplastics, invasive species, the nutrient runoff from industrial farming, destruction of wetlands and so on, because you know that. I am going to speak to 4 fairly new issues. Rachel referred to some of them as well that I think we need to take some time to think about, because I look back and I think if there had been an agreement around the lakes not to allow invasive species to really come up with a plan, it might have been able to be stopped, and we need to have that kind of plan now. And these are all developments that are happening at a time, the result of deliberate policy based on the erroneous notion that that the Great Lakes are a resource for our pleasure, our convenience, and our profit, and anything we do to them in the name of economic growth is okay. And I really think that there's a dual notion about what these Great Lakes are about. The first is fracking. Since 2005, there have been over 140,000 fracking wells drilled or permitted in the U.S. alone. Every year, these wells produce more than 1 trillion gallons of contaminated water. More than 600 chemicals, and many of them are carcinogenic, such as benzene, arsenic, toluene, are used in the fracking process. In her brilliant book, Frackopoly, Food and Water Watch's executive director, Winona Howda, warns us that shale gas reserves underlie vast areas of the Great Lakes. Yes, it's true that New York has banned fracking, but there are major fracking operations in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and both Wisconsin and Minnesota are being mined for silica, which of course is used in the fracking operation. In the land area of just 4 Great Lakes states within the Great Lakes Basin, If they were to experience the kind of shale development similar to that of the Marcellus Shale, total water withdrawals from the basin could exceed 37 billion gallons a year, and it would produce massive amounts of fracked wastewater as well to be disposed of. Fracking and the Great Lakes don't go together. Fracking must be banned, and we really have to see this as a lake-wide issue. On the Canadian side, we have a lot of fracking, but it's in Alberta and British Columbia, big fights that we're having there now, but we have managed to hold a moratorium in Quebec and stop any kind of operation yet in Ontario. Second major concern I have is that the Great Lakes have become a carbon corridor for some of the most extreme and dangerous energy on the planet. They're under immediate threat from the transport of heavy oil from the tar sands of Alberta, which is the largest industrial project on Earth. Alberta's vast deposits of oil are mixed with sand and clay. It's called bitumen. And when they're diluted with chemicals, which they have to do to move them through pipes because they're kind of the consistency of peanut butter, the bitumen is very thick. So to make it move through pipes, they have to dilute it. It's pure poison when it travels, and it puts every watershed that it touches in danger. This diluted bitumen is arguably the most toxic energy on Earth and is being shipped to American refineries from Canada in huge amounts, increasingly around and through the Great Lakes. There are now 66 American refineries processing tar sands bitumen. We don't have the processing capacity in Canada. It costs a great deal of money to build the kind of refineries. So we're shipping most of this stuff away. 19 of them are in the Great Lakes states, with 9 located right on the lakes, one of the lakes. But here's what I want to say to you this morning, that even with Keystone Pipeline, or without Keystone, before Keystone, and hopefully it never happens, the tar sands pipeline exports are absolutely burgeoning. The Alberta Clipper now carries about 800,000 barrels of Alberta crude every day to the Superior, Wisconsin refinery, and that's about the same volume that would be carried by the Keystone if it ever comes to pass. Enbridge is also quietly building a network of new and expanded pipeline systems called the Lakehead system that would also rival Keystone in terms of the amount that we're talking about. And this has been done very quietly. The Keystone was one big pipeline, but these are others that have quietly behind the scenes, because they're done in pieces, have not had the kind of examination that we should be giving them all, including, of course, Keystone. On the Canadian side, TransCanada plans to build Energy East pipeline, and it would be the biggest pipeline of them all, since quite a lot larger and carrying a lot more of this stuff, the crude, than Keystone. It's an export oil pipeline that will go from Hardisty, Alberta, right across the country, and to be exported by ship either down to refineries along the Atlantic coast to the U.S. or over to Europe. And it would traverse the top of Lake Superior. It would follow the Great Lakes Basin east. It would pass under the St. Lawrence Seaway, and it would cross almost 3,000 waterways on its journey, many of them that feed the Great Lakes. It is a very, very dangerous pipeline, and we're fighting it very hard in our country. The record of these pipeline companies for detecting and stopping spills is abominable to begin with. But spilled diluted bitumen, called dilbit, is especially dangerous to water and human health. There was a spill in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 2010. It took 17 hours for them to stop the spill, allowing almost 1 million gallons of toxic laced tar sands crude to spill into the river, where it inundated local marshes and wetlands and is still on the bottom of the water system. This stuff is like tar, and it just sticks. It's not the conventional oil spills are okay, but this stuff is different. And a spill into the Great Lakes would be catastrophic. Yet shipments of Alberta crude, including tar sands oil, are already moving on barges and transport on American waterways, and the industry is investing heavily into marine transport for the future. They are counting on this as being one of the most inexpensive ways to move this stuff rather than over land. Both the Canadian and American Coast Guards admit they're nowhere near ready for a bitumen spill, that all of their work and all of their experiment is using a conventional, but just try to imagine a rupture of Line 5, the aging pipeline that runs under the Straits of Mackinac, carrying 20 million gallons of oil and gas every day from the Wisconsin refinery, which is now accepting huge new shipments of this diluted bitumen. This is the doubling that happened, to Sarnia, Ontario. While Enbridge insists that the bitumen it carries now has been refined, there is absolutely no way to know if this is true or not. Many of you will know that the National Wildlife Federation has filmed Line 5. It's very, very disturbing video to look at, to see the condition under which, or in which, this line now exists. And they say that a spill would cause an Exxon Valdez type disaster that would cause unimaginable damage to the Great Lakes. It is extremely dangerous to the Great Lakes for it to become a carbon corridor for extreme energy. Transport of diluted bitumen by pipeline or barge must be banned, and Line 5 must be decommissioned. And these are issues that we can agree on all around the lake. We're also very concerned about the growing export of and transport of nuclear energy. Ontario is still using nuclear energy for a lot of our power generation and is seeking ways to dispose of the growing waste that poses in a way that poses a direct threat to the Great Lakes. Ontario Power Generation wants to build a deep geologic repository to house low and intermediate radioactive waste at the Bruce nuclear site and Kincardine, which is just under a mile from Lake Huron, literally right on Lake Huron. There are also plans on our side of the border to bury nuclear waste in Port Hope on Lake Ontario and within a half-mile of the Ottawa River, which is where I live, that drains into the St. Lawrence River. This is insanity. We are fighting it very hard on the Canadian side, and this is information that we need to share with each other about the threats to the lakes for all our different governments and corporations are doing. Burying nuclear waste that would be hazardous for hundreds of thousands of years on the shores of the Great Lakes is insanity, and as I say, we're fighting it very hard. As well, a U.S. court has given the go-ahead to ship liquid radioactive water from Canadian nuclear laboratories in Chalk River, which is in northern Ontario, across the Peace Bridge international border at Niagara Falls for disposal in Savannah River, South Carolina. Again, we've been fighting this very hard. The liquid nuclear waste is a mixture of bomb-grade uranium and highly radioactive fission products dissolved in nitric acid. A water spill would be just unimaginable. The local Niagara community, including the entire council on the Canadian side, is opposed to this, and the First Nations, it's called the Chiefs of Ontario, so it's all the chiefs of the First Nations communities in Ontario have taken a very strong stand against this. And as the Trump administration reopens discussions of a radioactive waste dump in Yucca Mountain, Nevada, concerns are growing that the original plan from, I think it was 15 years ago, to move giant, highly radioactive waste containers by barges on Lake Michigan have come back. So we need to be talking to each other about these new and growing threats. The Great Lakes must be fully protected from any form of disposal of nuclear waste while we fight the nuclear industry and continue to try to move away from it. And then there's bottled water, and Rachel spoke about this. We have actually called for a boycott of Nestle on the Canadian side, and we have almost 70,000 people in just a couple of months who've pledged to boycott Nestle in particular. You'll maybe know that Peter Brabeck, who is just stepping down as the CEO of Nestle, was the guy who has shepherded the bottled water strategy for Nestle over the years. And he refused to agree that water was a human right until we fought and got the United Nations to recognize it as a human right. And then he said, well, you know what? I'm just going to say that, all right, let's put 1.5% of the world's water aside for the poor, and the rest of it goes on the open market like oil and gas. Now, this is a guy not only sells bottled water all over the world, but he advises the World Bank and the United Nations on policy, water policy in the global south. So I have an example in one of my books that in Nigeria, he is promoting water through this, himself as an advisor. It's called the Water Resources 30 Group. He is advising the government of Nigeria to not allow public water, to shut down the public water systems and basically go to a private system while they've got a big bottled water plant there. And they actually claim, Nestle actually claims in Nigeria to say that, well, this is our part of the human right to water, is supplying this bottled water. So it's a deep and terrible conflict. On the Canadian side, Nestle is now taking over 1 million gallons, 4 million liters of water every single day from the Grand River that flows into Lake Erie. And the company just acquired another well, so it's going to have another 2 million liters, so 500,000 gallons a day from this well, and they outbid a local municipality for this water. So this is really disturbing when you actually have bidding for water that is needed for the community. Nestle pays the province of Ontario $3.71 for 250,000 gallons and is sucking the water out of a waterway where we have First Nations people, 11,000 families, without any access to drinking water. When we talk about the human right to water in our country, if you live in a First Nations community, you're 90% more likely not to have access to clean water or sanitation. And so right on the same system, and we've tracked where these bottles are being sold. They're being sold all over North America. It's truly consumptive because the water doesn't come back. Here in the U.S., since 2000, Nestle has pumped more than 4 billion gallons of water from Michigan's Muskegon River, paying only $200 a year in license fees. Now, the industry will say to you, okay, we don't use the same amount of water as, say, industrial agriculture, which is true. But they come into a local community, they put a plant on a local site, on a local spring, and they use it. They're like gold miners. They mine the water till it's gone, and then they move on, and they leave the local community and the local area parched of water. And this is what we need to understand. It may be that they don't use the same amount, but what they're doing is totally destructive to the local environment and the local community. Global bottled water sales are skyrocketing. The industry will sell over 115 billion gallons, 465 billion liters a year by 2020. That's what the industry is saying. Enough to reach to the moon and back if you were to put those plastic bottles on, and line them up to the moon and back 100 times. Many of these empty plastic bottles, of course, end up in the Great Lakes, and you know about the microplastics crisis that we're dealing with. And they contribute to a crisis that is already there. People say, yeah, but we put other things in plastic. Well, you can't, or bottle, whatever. You can't drink beer out of your tap, but you can get good, clean, safe water, drinking water out of our taps, and we need to start with this issue. No matter what the price, and this is the argument we're having in Ontario because our government's saying, okay, we're going to charge them more. No matter what the price, Nestle and other bottled water companies pay for this water. It is my view that they should not be having access to this to groundwater, any form of water, when we have clean, safe water that we care about, public water coming out of our taps. Now, these newer threats are a clear and present danger to the already endangered Great Lakes Basin, and years of deregulation on both sides of the border have made the situation worse and have been compounded by recent and highly political decisions to gut key water laws and funding. You know about what's happening here, but you may not know that our previous government, the Harper government, which was in power for a decade, set out to make war with the environmental community. He called us terrorists, fired thousands of scientists and researchers, and shut down gutted most of the institutes dealing and research labs and so on dealing with fresh water, including the one that most important that dealt with the Great Lakes from the Canadian side. They gutted the 3 most important water acts that we had. It's as if your government were to turn around and gut the Clean Water Act, which may be coming, who knows. But they gutted the Fisheries Act, the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and and now in Canada, 99% of all our lakes and rivers are totally unprotected. And we're very worried because we're hearing that the new government, the Trudeau government, and he's very cute. You've all seen pictures of how cute he is. So everybody forgives him for not changing the things he promised he would change, right? And this is one of them. He promised to reinstate those laws, but he's under a lot of pressure from the industries, the mining industry, the energy industry, the development industry, because they don't want those rules back. And they're pointing to the U.S. under Trump and saying there's deregulation in the U.S. and now we're not going to be able to stay here if we're going to find it more friendly to move to the United States. So we're now being compared if we have higher standards. And of course, then this is where these trade agreements come in. And if you get me started on that, you'll have to take a sheep hook to get me off. But trade agreements like NAFTA, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which for now is gone, like the ones that they're talking about with Europe and stuff, and Canada's, they've already put in motion the Canadian-European one, all give corporations the right to sue if you introduce new law, or even interpret a current law in a way that they can argue is discriminatory. We're now facing in Canada $2.8 billion worth of challenges under NAFTA alone from American corporations that are challenging our higher environmental rules. Most of them are about the environment. So we're setting up this competition, this kind of race to the bottom. And of course, as you know, Trump has announced plans to gut the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative by, 97%, and dismantle the EPA's Clean Water Rule, which gave it the right to regulate pollution in wetlands and streams and rivers that fed and protect the nation's major water bodies. Trump calls this law horrible, horrible. Did I say that right? Horrible, horrible. In place of law, we will leave it to the are we going to leave it to the marketplace then to protect our waterways? How is that possible? Food and Water Watch has published a blistering critique of water pollution trading, which is the newest thing and really coming on gangbusters here and around the world. You hear it when you go to some of the business schools, and you hear it at the UN, and you hear it at the World Bank. This is the non-regulatory way to protect water, they claim. But basically, water pollution trading allows polluters to continue to pollute by paying for or trading away the right to do so. Will we continue to punish the most vulnerable in our society as we deepen the divide between haves and have-nots? We in North America, and in Europe is happening too, are facing what I call a perfect storm in terms of the declining water stocks. That's why that number has gone up globally from 1 billion to 2 billion without adequate access to water, in spite of all the work that's been done. It's because we are also facing this ecological crisis and the growing poverty in the so-called first world, and rising water rates. And of course, a lot of that's privatization, but not only. And so this is a perfect storm that is bringing the crisis that we always thought was far away to our doorstep. In Europe, from the austerity agenda, they have cut thousands and thousands of people off of water. They just come in and cut them off. And in some cases, they're thrown out on the street too. The notion that people must live without access to water is something growing closer to home. As you know, water was cut to well over 23,000 Detroit homes in 2015 alone, and the city, of course, recently started a new round of brutal cutoffs to almost another 18,000 homes this spring. And I've been to Detroit many times working with the communities there. We brought over water in great big recyclable jugs as a symbol 2 springs ago. We had a convoy and brought over water, public water, from Windsor, Ontario to the people in Detroit. It was a wonderful thing. We had a big convoy, and we met in the Peace Park downtown, and we brought the water to the churches where they're distributing it. And of course, it was symbolic, but we got stopped by Homeland Security and had to declare that we were, peddling public water across the, they really gave us a hard time, and they knew perfectly well what we were doing. What we need instead is the rule of law. Martin Luther King said, legislation may not change the heart, but it will restrain the heartless. which I think is one of the most beautiful things anybody ever said. Without the rule of law, protection of the planet's dwindling water resources, as well as the notion of water justice, will further plummet. We also need a real commitment to a just and accessible water system, and that means investing in infrastructure and committing in this country to the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act, the Water Act. This would create a dedicated, sustainable source of funding to update America's essential drinking water and sewer systems and replacing aging and lead-ridden pipes. And we are fighting for the exact same thing on the Canadian side, and this is something we need to share with each other. We also need a new water ethic that asks the question in everything we do, every single policy, every act, every practice, what is the impact on water? And if the impact on water isn't okay, you go back to the drawing boards. When you're using up the water of the Ogallala Aquifer and the Department of Agriculture says it will be gone in our lifetime, the whole aquifer will be gone in our lifetime. We are swallowing it so hard. So much of it is corn for corn ethanol. It takes 1,700 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of corn ethanol. If you ask, is that a fair trade-off? No, it's not. And we fall back, I call it air versus water. We fall back again and again saying, well, it's just water. We have so much of it. And this water ethic should be based on several principles, on the principles of water justice, water sustainability, water sharing, and public trust. Quite simply, water is the common heritage of all people, future generations, and the planet. Because it's a flow source necessary for life and ecosystem health, and because there's no substitute for it, water must be regarded as a public trust and preserved in law and in practice for all time. This has got to be the common principle that guides us as we build this common way of guiding, protecting and managing these Great Lakes. And by the way, this is done elsewhere. In the year 2000, Europe adopted a water management system where all the waters, any water that crosses a political border must be seen, must be governed as a watershed as opposed to part of this country or that country. That's how they cleaned up Lake Constance. I mean, Lake Constance was once like Lake Erie. And the last time I was there, they took a cup and said, here, drink from it. I was in Zurich a few months ago, and the kids are all swimming in the lake, and there's a city around it. I mean, there is a city around the Lake Zurich. I mean, it's possible to do this, and we need to look where people have done this. Jim Olson of Michigan's Flow for Love of Water says the concept of public trust is gaining traction across the world because its time has come. And let me say what he just said this in an email to me, and I'm just going to read it back to you. This is because, he said, these principles are tied to ancient customs and cultures and arose in a watershed or basin in which the custom evolved. It's inherent in water and embedded in each of us, no matter where we live. Where water falls, flows, life begins and sustains, defining landscapes, plants, animals, including we humans. If we acknowledge, respect, and apply this concept and these principles first and foremost to water, we will make very good decisions about climate change, water use, water service, energy, food, land use, community, health, and justice, now and in the future, in common and for each and every one of us. This is how we respect and protect the true and intrinsic value of water, no matter what the economic measure or paradigm. So the Great Lakes are a public trust. They are our public trust. They are our commons. And all the competing uses of the Great Lakes waters should have to pass a test not only of just fairness of access, but also that they will not draw down or destroy the future capacity of the watershed. This needs to be the fundamental guiding principle. Public trust offers a body of principles that combine public good, public control, and public oversight with the long-term protection of the watershed. It also sets the stage for an agreed-upon hierarchy of use, whereby some uses of the water, such as the human right to water or ecosystem protection, take precedence over others. And I helped design the law in Vermont for groundwater that actually says that in times of any kind of shortage or crisis, these will be the priorities, including water, growing food for local consumption, not for, mass export. Public trust principles tells us that the waters of the Great Lakes belong to everyone and all beings that live on or around them, and it insists that private interests of those with claims to the Great Lakes are subordinate to public rights. The water systems of the Great Lakes require constant and careful management and must remain under public management. This is so important. Would we, the stewards of this public trust, allow radioactive and fracking waste or dangerous tar sands crude laced with chemicals to travel on, around, or over, or under our Great Lakes? Would we say it's okay for some to have all the water they want for swimming pools and golf courses and fountains and everything else, while many thousands of others within sight of the Great Lakes must go without running water at all? Would we, as stewards, allow the unbridled exploitation of the Great Lakes when so much of the world is in such desperate need of this water? In a February 2017 statement, Pope Francis reiterated his passionate support for the human right to water, but he added a dire warning. I ask myself if, he said, in this piecemeal Third World War that we are living through, are we not going towards a great war for water? Can we avoid conflict and violence over water scarcity, or is it possible to see water as a tool for peace? The Jordan story. Is it possible that it can be nature's gift to us to teach us how to live more lightly on the planet and in peace and respect with one another? Communities around the Great Lakes are leading this fight. Some of you would have known the late, wonderful Charity Hicks, an amazing water warrior from Detroit. I called her the Martin Luther King of water. She explained that the Detroit People's Water Board brought environmentalists, welfare rights activists, and water justice groups together with the question, what does water mean for all of us together? She said, we attend to both human and ecological sustainability. She warned that public authorities need public pressure and that everyone should get involved. And she said this, we are saying that you are part of this conversation. You are an expert. We are all experts. We have full agency. This is what democracy looks like. I would dearly love to see the Great Lakes municipalities, I'm going to put this notion out to you today, that we start talking about blue communities. Now, blue communities started in Canada. We started because we had that horrible government that was talking about not only privatization of everything, but they actually said to Canadian municipalities, if you need money for infrastructure, water infrastructure, you have to go to a public-private partnership if you're going to get federal money. You won't get it if you stay public. So our municipalities were beginning one by one to look at the privatization of water services. And so we got there first. We got to 19 cities, and we're still growing, when they pledged, and this goes through the city council, so there's a big debate, and it often involves school kids and everybody, the newspapers get involved, but they pledged three things: to protect water as a human right, to protect water as a public service, therefore no privatization, and to promote tap water over bottled water if the tap water is safe. We understand that there'll be parts of the world where this isn't so. So as I say, it started in Canada, but it has spread. We're just so excited. In Bern, Switzerland became the first city outside of Canada to go blue. And they also agreed to promote public partnerships with some cities in the global south, so they would help them develop their public systems. Paris became a blue community after many years of privatization. In fact, there are, since the year 2000, over 235 municipalities around the world that tried privatization have gone back to a public system because it failed. So this kind of blue communities kind of says, we're proud of that. We want this to happen. Paris, Berlin, we think is going to become a blue community. I was just in Berlin and I'm very excited. But suddenly a whole bunch of universities around the world are going blue and faith-based communities are going blue. Last spring, I had the honor of presiding over a ceremony in Geneva where the World Council of Churches, which represents 500 million people around the world, became a blue community, and they are spreading it through their networks as well. And this is what the World Council of Churches said: because water justice requires the ethical management of water, it must be available to all future generations. This requires preserving biodiversity and guaranteeing universal access to water and sanitation as a core right. This in turn requires the democratic governance of water, and that water must be considered a common good. Economic exploitation of water is unethical, says the World Council of Churches. No compensable private rights of water should be created. It's a pretty radical statement for an institution that has tended to be more careful in other things. This is really important that we've got faith-based communities coming forward in this way. People and communities around the world are fighting for water justice and to protect the waters that they have been entrusted to care for. We who love these mighty lakes are doing the same community by community. And we know in our hearts that these lakes do not just serve us, but they serve themselves, they serve other species, they serve an ecosystem, and they have rights of their own. And we really need to start thinking about the notion of rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth, and how we can change our laws, how we can adapt our laws to be more respectful of the laws of nature. In my years of working with water justice, I've come to believe that water is many things, including it's a very powerful teacher. You can teach so many things starting from a water base, from science to music to literature to the whole notion of justice to trade agreements. I just wrote, anybody wants, you go to our website, Canadians.org. I just wrote a report called Water for Sale, and it's how trade agreements threaten the right to protect, the need to protect water around the world. But it's a wonderful starting off point talking about water because you can go so many places. So I have two quick stories to tell you, and then if we have a couple of minutes for discussion. But what I've learned is that people put themselves on the line for water. So one of the stories I want to tell you about is the very first water war that we know about, and that was in Cochabamba, Bolivia in 1997. The World Bank told Cochabamba that, as they do with other places, that if they wanted funding for water upgrading for their infrastructure, water services, they had to take a private company. And they said, you'll take Bechtel. Bechtel was an engineering company whose motto at the time was, we pave the world. They knew nothing about water except how to charge people a lot of money for it. So then Bechtel came in, they set up their water service, and they started charging people, tripled the price of water, and this is a largely poor indigenous community. They couldn't afford it. They also said, we own the water that comes from the sky. And if you are caught hoarding water by catching it in the rain, we will fine you. We will confiscate the water and so on. So there was an uprising. People took to the streets. The army was brought in. People were killed. And the person who led it was a wonderful man named Oscar Oliveira. Oscar was a shoemaker by trade, and he'd never done anything like this before. His anger at the injustice of what he was seeing gave him a courage, he told me, that he didn't know he had. So I asked him once, I said, why water, Oscar? Because your people, the Amira, have been put through so much by so many. This is just one awful story after another. But he said, why water? He said, because water is life. Local water is personal, mine, ours. How dare they claim it for their faraway investors? And he said, because I would rather die of a bullet than of thirst. I remember that the first time I toured the Alberta tar sands, and if you ever get a chance to do it, you should. It's like a moonscape. It's Mordor, right? And it smells terrible, and they have to keep these gunshots going so that the birds don't land on these vast lagoons of poisoned water. We held a press conference after we did this tour, and a young First Nations leader named Mike Mercredi said something very similar at the press conference. He said, my people are dying from the cancers that this stuff is creating. He said, I'm out in the bush at night, I can see it, it's coming here. And we're sick, we're getting sick. And he said, it would be kinder for you to come in and shoot us than to do it this way. It reminded me that the issues are here in our communities. Last story is a good story. They're all good stories in that I mean, they won the Bolivia, they kicked the company out, then they put in Evo Morales as president, and he kicked the other company, Suez, out of La Paz, and so on. So, I mean, the fight back, when we fight back, we do succeed. But I want to just end by sharing with you a story from a fight against a dump site on Lake Huron. It's a beautiful area called Simcoe County in Ontario. So there's Lake Huron, there's Georgian Bay. You see the big bump is Georgian Bay. Beautiful primetime farmland, just gorgeous. And the local council is made up of the mayors of these little towns. Like one of them is called Tiny Township, so we're talking small villages, right? They all come together to make big decisions. 2 decades ago, they agreed to allow a dump site, a massive industrial dump site, to be built on an aquifer called the Alliston Aquifer, right on the lake. And this water has been tested in a lab in Germany as the cleanest water they'd ever tested anywhere. Anyway, I'm sure there's other clean water, but it's beautiful water. So we fought it and fought it and fought it, and 5 years ago, that was it. We were finished with the lawsuits. The community, the warden said, we're moving ahead. They started bringing in, they had already confiscated the farmland. They started bringing in the heavy equipment to start to dig the first of what were going to be 4 huge cells for this massive industrial site. And we set up a camp in the farm across with the farmer's permission, and it was led by the First Nations women of a local First Nations community, the Beausoleil. And they started a peace fire, and they said that the fire would not go out until it's called Site 41, the project was killed. So they would get up in the morning at 5 o'clock, and they would go and they would just happen to hold prayers every morning as the big trucks were coming in, just happen to hold them coincidentally in the road where the trucks came in, right? So we delayed it for 5 weeks, and then that was it. It was too late because they couldn't build it in time to get ahead of the fall frost. So the warden was furious, a real bully. He was the warden of all the mayors. So he started arresting people, and they went to one farmhouse, and this elderly couple, she was making butter tarts for the church bazaar. She got arrested, and the kids who came the young police officers, she'd been their teacher, so she said, well, come in and have some hot chocolate and butter tarts, and then I'll get in the police car with you. Well, it gave us a chance to get to the media, of course. And so as she was being let out, all the media was there. And she said, I've never even had a parking ticket, but if I'm going down for water, right? Anyway, long story short, we finally get that August, we get an agreement to hold a moratorium vote at the community council. And I would say a third of the councillors were opposed to Site 41, so for the moratorium. A third were for Site 41 and against the moratorium, and about a third were in the middles. And it was packed to the gills. I'm telling you, there must have been 2,000 people. We had to set up loudspeakers on the outside, and it was pure pandemonium inside. People up from the balcony were throwing food, and it was like democracy in the raw. So all the national media was there because this had become a real David and Goliath story. So it was just heart-poundingly important. So the person who was leading our side, the anti-Site 41 side, she was the mayor of Tiny Township. She got up and gave a wonderful speech. Well, then the guy who was leading the pro-Site 41 site got up. Big, tough guy, former business guy, used to be a linebacker, right, like big, tough, and he loved to fight the protesters. He used to have a saying, get up early, beat a protester. He thought this was funny, so he loved Site 41. He gets up to speak, and we're all nervous, because if he's good, that middle third's going to go there, right? He starts to cry. And he says, and this is about the Great Lakes, right? This is Lake Huron. He says, when I got up this morning, I was going to come in here, and I was going to fight you guys, and he goes like this to the balcony, as I always did, Now, I was going to say no to this moratorium and fight for Site 41, and I went into my home office, and my grandkids had found one of the Stop Site 41 signs, and they put it on my desk, and they wrote the word Papa on it. And he said, in that moment, my entire life changed, my mandate changed. He said, I am now a steward of the water of Simcoe County and of Georgian Bay and Lake Huron, and as long as I live, Site 41 will never be built, and Site 41 was never built. Yeah. It has been returned to productive farmland. So now here, for each of us, we have to collectively confront the very power structures that have prevented the change that we need to make to protect and honor the great heritage of these Great Lakes. Future generations have the same right to breathe clean air and drink clean water as we do. Much rests on what we do now. Thank you so, so much.
Maud, it's wonderful to hear you in person after reading your books and listening to you speak for decades. It's really great. Thanks for coming here. The Enbridge Corporation that you mentioned tar sends oil directly to the BP Whiting refinery that's on the shores of Lake Michigan. They've installed extra pumps to boost Line 61 to 1.2 million barrels a day. What do you think is the most powerful action that we could take in this city, the most affectively, symbolically, and politically powerful action to make the residents of Chicago aware of what is going on, aware that we here are participating in the tar sands disaster and that we're bringing it to the most dangerous place possible, the shores of Lake Michigan?
We'll take a couple, and then I got notes here. Desiree, there's folks waiting here.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I also have read your books, and I am just amazed to see you and hear you and feel encouraged by your stories. My question is it possible to bring the nation on board through the entertainment industry? If there was a movie producer, Brad Pitt, or somebody who really cares about social issues, who you could speak to directly and get a movie out there for the world to hear about all of this going on?
Hi, thank you. That was great. Curious, you mentioned a lot about public water systems versus private water systems. Here in Chicago, we have one of the largest public water systems anywhere, and it comes with great costs and expense, and it's hard to keep up. It brings larger questions about water affordability and rates, and even from neighborhood to neighborhood or community in the suburbs to community. My question for you is, why do you have faith in public water systems, and why is that better than a private system that's thoughtfully designed?
Maybe one more. There's a couple here and one up here.
Thank you, Maud. I saw you first in 1999 at an international conference at the University of British Columbia, and
That was fabulous.
that was fabulous.
That was a fabulous conference.
What a lovely place Vancouver is. Thank you for your speech. I also want to talk about public water systems. As terrible as the commodification and private water systems are and the problems that they create, our public water systems all across the United States, and I would venture in other places, are poisoning our people with lead and water, are in denial, not following the science, and are not acting as if it's the emergency that it is. I come from a community that had 30 times the amount of lead and water as Flint. We had 200 babies that died, 2,000 that were not born, and between 800 and 42,000 children who were lead poisoned. And still, we've had no apologies, no interventions, and we still have lead in water in high amounts in our schools. So what I was told by Food and Water Watch when I talked to them about this, and they're active partners with me, is that we ought not to criticize public water systems because people will lose faith in the public water systems. But I would venture to say, and ask you this question, isn't that precisely what's at stake in not dealing with the issues that are flowing out of our taps and that are harming our communities and creating violence, economic distress, and injustice? Shouldn't we also, in addition to dealing with the horror of private water systems, deal with the horror of the public water systems and what they're doing to our people and our planet?
There's two, how about one and one?
Thank you, Maud, for your lifelong work in protecting water. And thank you for coming to Detroit. I live in a neighborhood who was shut off all at once, 3 blocks, all of us completely shut off. That's how they do in Detroit. They shut off whole neighborhoods at one time. And it's continuing now. You mentioned the 18,000 shut-offs. I'm wondering if, with all of the things that you all in the Council of Canadians is working on as far as portable water, maybe we can come together and really confront this issue. Yeah, I work with the People's Water Board, so it's absolutely viable that we could do that. And my question to you is, you know, we're looking at a 500% raise in water hikes and things looking in the next couple years. How can we confront that in a way where low-income people are at the forefront of that? Thank you.
You can use the mic.
All right. Hey, how's it going? Okay, this is pretty cool. Well, I just wanted to say I appreciate the talk. Yeah. Appreciate the talk. It's kind of funny because back in my hometown of Rockford, I've been trying to do this as a one-man crew, trying to say some things about this and been laughed at quite a bit. So it's pretty amazing that I'm able to find like a group of people who think the same way. And the problem is actually a lot worse than I was thinking it was. So I guess that's my question was, as far as like desalination plants and things like that, I know like the primary problem is that like when you have the water go back into the oceans, we have like brine and the chemicals going back. I was just trying to see if we have like any innovations you heard of about making that more efficient. So I haven't really heard anything except for, you know, like in the Middle East, using like more alternative energy like solar panels as far as generating power, but I don't know anything about the brine. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. These are wonderful questions. I'll start with the last one. You're absolutely right. The desalination as we know it now is energy intensive, it's really expensive, and it puts a very polluting brine back out into the ocean. In fact, in Australia, what they do is they put great big pipelines, huge pipes, way out so that stick it out there. Who cares? And I don't know what's killing the barrier reef, but I don't think it helps that there's that much desalination. And I know that desalination in the Middle East they're actually talking about peak salt. There's peak oil, there's peak water, there's peak salt. They take the water out, they desalinate it, they're putting so much salt back into the Gulf of Arabia, and it's not being flushed out because they dammed all the rivers. Like, do everything wrong and then see what you can do with this water. The most important thing is not to pollute it in the first place. And I worry that we have a kind of society that thinks that technology can always fix something. And so there might be a technology coming down the pike. I haven't seen it. And I do know that just speaking of Australia, down at the bottom of the Murray-Darling goes down, used to take water to the ocean. A few years ago, they had such a drought that it stopped bringing water to the mouth. So 2 cities there decided on different operations, plans. One of them brought in massive desalination. It's in overrun. They're suing the company. It's a mess. Another one called Salisbury, and it's worth looking it up. This guy, his name is Colin Pittman, and he went to the city council there, and he said, instead of doing that, let's build wetlands, and let's find ways of taking plants and aquatic life that eats pollution, and they've built, I think, something like 110 wetlands, and they've got so much water now, clean water, that they're storing it. They're selling it to Adelaide, the city that went with the desal. So Gerard Manley Hopkins, the wonderful romantic poet, said, there's a deep dearness down in nature. Nature will come back if we stop hurting it. This is the thing we need to understand. There is regeneration, but we have to stop doing it in the first place. But I worry that the technology issue, well, we'll fix it, and I hear that all the time. There must be a way. On the Whiting refinery, the Whiting refinery, I know that Bill McGibbon was there. Who asked that question? That was right here. Bill McGibbon led a big event there, got arrested. I think that helped for somebody who's as well known as he is to be there. But I would say what we might think about doing is bringing people from the First Nations community from Alberta, and saying, this is where it's going, because, and I know that the government, the state government has let this refinery off the hook in terms of legislation. They've just looked the other way, and I've got some detail in one of my books on it. But that would be, I think, if you want to put that human face, and I always remember with the Keystone Pipeline, the new CIA, the Cowboys and Indians Alliance, really caught everybody's imagination. So something along that, so that Americans would know, we're part of this. They know when we put gas in our car, where does it come from? You need to go see it if you haven't seen it, or just look it up. Google the tar sands. It's incredible. And yes, if anybody knows any famous actors who could make a wonderful movie, yes, yes, yes. I'm going to go talk just quickly about the question about public water. And my friend asking this question about, just want to make sure he's listening. You asked about public water. We have the right to criticize governments that are not, and municipalities and governments that are not putting money into public water. That doesn't mean that the private system is better. In some ways, it just makes it worse because the project is much more hidden. It's much less transparent. But in my country, we're very critical of our governments at all levels when they. When the water system isn't as it should be. We have the right to good governance. Because we don't have it doesn't mean we don't have the right to it. And I think that's what that's got to stay in front of our faces. And yes, of course we have the right to say that. And people need to be paying their taxes, and the rich, damn it, have to be paying their taxes. And we've cut corporate taxes in my country down to the bone. They're worse than here in the U.S., although I think under Trump that's going to happen as well. But so there isn't the fund, and that's why we really need to. This Water Act is so important. Finally, on the question of Detroit, yes, we should do it again. Who asked the question on Detroit? Yes, of course. I'm sorry. Yes, we're thinking about doing another convoy. It sure got a lot of media. It really brought the issue home. What really initially brought the media home was we brought the UN in. We brought UN experts in, and they were scathing, and they said that the U.S. was violating the human right to water, which is a very important thing for them to say. So we just got to keep at it, and you don't know when something's going to turn and change, because it does. And I just want to end by saying hope is a moral imperative. You have to have hope. And I just want to tell you about a 95-year-old friend of mine. When any of us get down, and she's been involved in every fight, including she remembers the fight for the votes for women. I mean, she's been around a while. And she says, when fighting for justice, it's not like a fashion that you take on and off. It's something you do every day. And then when she gets real upset, she says, fighting for justice, it's like taking a bath. You do it every day or you stink. Thank you guys very much. Thank you so much. Safe travel.
Okay, so don't get up. Yeah. So thanks again to Maude Barlow for joining us here today. It's a great pleasure. And we are going to be calling up Quinn Douglas in a moment to introduce our next speaker. We're getting the PowerPoint going right now. I'll just give a brief word. It's okay, we've got time. We're doing fine. Just by way of explanation when we get to lunch, because that's what we'll do next, there will be food in the Fort Dearborn room. It might, in fact, work like stone soup and everyone can eat, which would make me really happy. It might not. I definitely want all of our speakers and our out-of-town guests to make sure that they partake in that food. So if you're able to go within the Student Center East, we will put a map up after our next speaker of some local places, and you can bring the food back and sit with us in the room and mill around. Yeah, I have an ethic of generosity and the commons, so I just hope everyone is patient within working with that and contributes what they can. I'd bring in the cooking from my own house, but UIC would get me on union rules. So if we are all set with the PowerPoint, then let me introduce an extraordinary UIC student whom I met through Professor Jubeir. Quinn, would you join us? Please join me in welcoming Quinn. Ben's gonna do this. Ben, you got the, okay. Okay. Oh, here's, can you hook it up over here so Quinn can, she's there. And here she is.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Quinn. I am a UIC student here, majoring in psychology. Well, how did I get to the freshwater lab, right? So I'm actually a student of Dr. Johari Jubeir, who gave that excellent performance earlier. And he connected me with Rachel, and here I am. I'm interested in environmental injustice more generally and how it disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. So being here and learning about it and those, you know, in the grassroots of it is something that I want to be a part of. So today I'll be introducing, before I begin, I want to also give thanks again and acknowledge the UIC Chancellor's Committee on the Status of Blacks, Women's Leadership and Resource Center, and the African American Cultural Center. So I am introducing Denise Abdul-Rahman. Denise's main passion every day is working toward a vision that eliminates environmental injustices, increases clean energy, and contributes to healthy, thriving, climate-resistant, and sustainable communities. Denise holds a bachelor's in management, MBA in healthcare management, and a health informatics designation from Indiana University School of Informatics. She successfully organized over 85 attendees from across the Midwest to United States Environmental Protection Agency at Region 5. In February of 2016, Indianapolis Power Light stopped burning coal. In response, Denise organized the Just Energy campaign, and the advocacy of campaign was instrumental and crucial in the defeat of the House Bill 1320, which ensured that there would be no fees charged to the distributed generation of energy in Indiana. The victory rose to national coverage in LA, Times, and Bloomberg News. Denise serves the NAACP Indiana as an Environmental Climate Justice Chair and is the organizer of Our Power Plan, EPA Region 5. She is a credentialed delegate to Paris COP21 for the Grassroots Global Alliance. She is a part of the REAMP Midwest Energy News 40 Under 40 Selection Advisory Committee and a Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana board member. Without further ado, welcome Denise Abdul-Rahman.
Well, good afternoon. I am really humbled and honored to be able to address you this afternoon. And again, my name is Denise Abdul-Rahman, and I serve as the NAACP Indiana Environmental Climate Justice Chair. I want to thank Mila, and she also thanked the groups that I wanted to thank, which is, I want to thank Quinn and Mila Marshall and all of the groups through the University of Illinois Chicago Chancellor Committee on the Status of Blacks, Women's Leadership and Resource Center, and the African American Cultural Center for bringing me into this space to be able to share some different perspective as it relates to the NAACP's advocacy within water as a human right. Just a little bit about me and sort of how I even came into this space. As Quinn had shared, most of my advocacy has been around clean energy and working with utilities on fixed rate charges, while the clean energy kind of morphed into the utility work. And then, of course, all of it within the perspective of reducing CO2 emissions to protect our communities from climate change. And then as things have transpired, then moving more into working toward more equitable systems across many of our systems across the nation and, of course, across the globe. And then now morphing into water. So I'm really a novice at water, so I'm going to give a real, strong attempt to share just the narrative of the work of the NAACP and some of the work that we've done here in this local arena, most specifically to East Chicago and some in Indianapolis. I am many generations, because I'm sure there's someone in my ancestry that was fighting for human and civil rights. But more recently, my big mama, she marched to the I Have a Dream speech with Martin Luther King 1 month before my birth and existence. So she found it just that important, her very first grandchild that she left to journey for those rights. Also, my mother she traveled to Lagos, Cameroon, and to Beijing during the time of Hillary Rodham Clinton and worked for women's rights on behalf of many various women of color, obviously the Chinese women, and in Nigeria, helping to empower women's rights. And my father, very near here in the 70s, he helped work with the National Black Caucus via the mayor, Richard Hatchard. So I share this because when it comes to environmental climate justice, all of the advocacies are really as one. They're in one circle to make our communities whole and sustainable. The NAACP has an environmental and climate justice program that is directed by Jacqueline Patterson, who is instrumental in me being here also today. And we are able to take the reports that through her research and her team creates and the resolutions through our memberships, and we are able to bring voice to that and thus activism, which is what I predominantly do. Julian Bond once told me that if you don't use your voice, no one can hear you. Our narratives and framing regarding this water issue are grounded in our efforts to move toward equity and to just transitions, a transition away from oppressive and polluting systems, a transition from bad to good systems. Thus, water is a human right, and people of African descent and other vulnerable folks have a disproportionate relationship and disproportionately impacted by water decisions, and most vulnerable to climate change. Folks of African descent's relationship with water is intersectional. Again, the NAACP has a long history since 1909 and has addressed a vast array of civil rights issues, including education, employment, housing, civic engagement, health, and criminal justice. Communities of color nationwide are and have historically been beset by human and civil rights violations, including disproportionate exposure to pollution, crime, substandard living conditions, and more. And water is life. Water needs to be preserved. It needs to have conservation methods for safety and access and affordability as a human and civil right. 98% of our water is salt water, and 2% is fresh water. 70% is snow and ice. 30% is groundwater, and less than 0.5% is surface water, lakes and rivers, and less than 0.05% is in the atmosphere. Water is impacting our climate change. Water is impacted by climate change. And our connection, obviously, to water. Our bodies are more than 60% of the human body consists of water, and water does so much for us, right? It helps to convert contaminants out of our body. It helps get waste out of our body. It lubricates our joints, and so we're highly connected with water. Our varying and historical relationship to water as it relates to people of African descent, most specifically, is that we were separated from the continent of Africa due to our enslavement, and we were divided by the vastness of the ocean water. Water led us to the north to gain our freedom from enslavement. And we have various religious connections to water, baptisms and Muslim purification rituals before prayer. Water is recreational, kind of from a different perspective, though, from my recesses of my memory of wading in polluted, flooded water in Tennessee and thinking that was, you know, a great thing. It was great fun as a recreation. And using water hose as a means of recreation so the difference of wealth and how water is utilized is different in our communities. Fishing, not so much for recreation, but more so for livelihood, and gardening for livelihood, and of course, using water to cleanse ourselves. Right here in this area, we have an example of the segregation relationship to water. In July 27, 1919, an African-American teenager, whose name wasn't mentioned in this report, Eugene Williams, say his name, drowned in Lake Michigan after violating the unofficial segregation of Chicago's beaches. And he was stoned in the Lake Michigan, and causing his death, and it caused an outbreak between blacks and whites, Chicagoans, and concentrated on the South Side neighborhood of Chicago. And when the riots ended, 15 whites were killed and 23 blacks. 1,000 black families had lost their homes, and 500 people were injured. And so this just to give some historical relationship to people of African descent and our kind of yin and yang relationship with water. The NAACP has been working within the basin. We have outlined issues of importance as it relates to addressing threats, in particularly at our local levels, as it relates to the water system's infrastructure, that being things like revenue that prevent the investment of aging systems in our communities. There are billions of dollars that are available, but yet the decision makers and political powers that be are shifting the spending to other areas. The diversion of funds, we have an example in the South with our Mississippi NAACP conference that shows that there's a pattern of state-level diversion of funds that were meant for water infrastructure, but then is used for other purposes. Of course, there's the wastewater systems and stormwater management, and we have examples right here that there are several cities here that dump and discharge gallons of raw and partially treated sewage into the lakes each year. Also, privatization of water. We have that outlined. We have examples of Atlantic City NAACP branch, which is protesting the proposed privatization of water. We have Detroit branch that has created a People's Water Board and has fought against privatization. And Charleston, West Virginia, has been a very vocal opponent against the privatization of water systems. Water access and affordability is concerns and what we have advocated for through the NAACP. Everything from water shutoffs in Baltimore, Maryland in 2014, 20,000 residents were on the list to have their water shut off. In Detroit, in Detroit in 2014, the water utility shut off 100,000 people. Water uses. There's more scarce, water is becoming more scarce due to drought and contamination. The transporting of oil and gas through pipelines for hydraulic fracturing. And though there are cleaner and safer and more efficient ways to generate energy, as we know, solar and wind, et cetera, and geothermal. Drinking water contamination. So we have right here East Chicago, Indiana, that does not have clean water to drink. The NAACP has issued a East Chicago, United States Environmental Protection, Environmental Justice demands to the EPA. Things related to water is we ask for to expedite the pending groundwater study. We ask to have the Safe Drinking Water Act. We signed on a petition that calls on steps to ensure clean drinking water for residents of the Superfund and the city wide. These demands were also called to be an executive order to the current United States administration, asking that this be implemented systemically across the nation. President Cornell William Brooks of the NAACP came to East Chicago and lifted these demands, as well as a East Chicago toxic crisis stakeholder report in which we gained a lot of information from the residents, everything from right now, it's unsafe for them to even brush their teeth with water. We've donated 100 bottles of water, also have provided, have not disseminated yet, but filtration systems along with the EPA, who has already distributed filtration systems there. We are impacted through the fisheries and contamination of our fisheries. That's a picture of my brother there. He's an adamant fisherman, but I'm always concerned about the mercury and lead levels as he fishes in the rivers of his community. And wetlands, watershed threats, disasters and flooding, sea level rise, and drought. And these are all work across the nation that the NAACP works on. As it relates to the fisheries, it's everything from the coal ash being dumped to the industrial contaminations of the drilling, the mining, and the mercury from the coal plants. Commercial animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, in North Carolina, the wastes that are responsible for over 110,000 fish deaths. And in relation to the disaster and flooding, the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans, with over 98.3% of the folks being of African descent. The community there is still trying to become more resilient and resistant, and is impacted everything from their voting being different, to the employment, to their culture, and everything having changed their way of living. In East Chicago, the lead crisis, that community is 92% people of African descent and Latino. That community, we sent out these reports. The Pure organization is donating the 100 filtration systems. They're actually at the First Baptist Church right now, and Twin City Ministerial Alliance partnered with us. We also disseminated fruits and vegetables, because lead impacts the body, and fruits and vegetables absorb lead and try to, you can't reverse the impacts of lead on the brain, but you can try to slow it down from moving through the system. And so that is some of what we did. Also, there is Akeisha Daniels, a resident of East Chicago, using her agency to speak for her community. We have signed a petition to get new water infrastructure built through the EPA, or to get funding from EPA to give them all new water infrastructure. We also have signed petitions to stop the dumping of PCBs within the harbor, the Indiana harbor there. You have a great champion there in the back, Thomas Frank, for his community of East Chicago. And so we've been working with communities on the ground there, and we hope to do more. We've held 3 to 4 listening sessions and roundtables, and the other things that were mentioned. In Indianapolis, Indiana, there's a contaminated water plume. It impacts over 55,000 people in the community there. Here it's kind of a challenging story, because the community pretty much advocated against its own interests. There was a $60 to $70 million development project, and the community was concerned about their property values. Many of the corporations came in and started to shift the narrative of concern about them being in a Superfund site, and how that was going to impact their property values, their insurance, how there may not be any development that would occur there because, permits would not be issued. And so the community, everyone from the mayors to the governors to the residents, wrote into the comment area of the EPA. This was already on the national priority list, and they actively worked to move it off of the list, and opted to try to work through a process with the state of Indiana that does not have a great track record as it relates to remediating communities in their environment. And so right now, it has literally just been moved with the Memorandum of Understanding from the EPA to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management to begin. This is so vast. If you can see that area, that red area, they have to search that entire area to find out where the source of contamination is coming from. It's like over 238 locations to find out where the source is. So it's going to take years to find out how and why that plume is being contaminated. And that community is predominantly a community of color, although Indianapolis is 25% African American, but that specific area where the plume is located is probably around 95% people of color, African descent. So our existing plans and aspiration of work in the NAACP on water within a frame of community sustainability is, of course, water is life, water is a human right, the intersectionality of water on everything from educational systems, children, there's an underrepresentation of STEM and science, which means underrepresentation in water systems and development and advocacy. One of the things we kind of are communicating with in East Chicago is around that the children there need to learn that history of what has happened to their families, where they have been living, what is occurring, so that they can be their own community scientists and so that they can be instrumental in solving that problem. So STEM needs to be inserted into that community. Consumption of contaminated water, which is the case in East Chicago, obviously it impacts one's ability to learn. We looked at the data, and the ISTEP scores have been declining in that city over the number of years. And so the likelihood of these children entering to the school to prison pipeline is highly probable. Economics, low income and low wealth communities are more vulnerable to water shutoffs, and low resource communities are more likely to have insufficient water infrastructures, and voting rights. We've seen this right now in East Chicago with the displacement of, I believe it's approximately 1,500 families. How do we assure that they get re-registered in their new locations? How do we assure that they are able to vote? So water-related displacement has resulted in everything from not being able to vote to redistricting due to population shifts. And voting rights are violated, more likely to be violated in communities of color, and are less likely to have input and control over their water systems. The criminal justice system, an example, when the BP oil disaster occurred and the Flint crisis occurred, there were incidents of ICE raids, which put communities in peril. As it relates to the criminal justice histories, can impede seeking help because one may have, a bad relationship with the criminal justice system and thus will not seek help during a water disaster crisis. Criminalization in the context of disasters disproportionately impacts communities of color and low income. I also know of an example, as I may recall, that in Flint, that the folks that were incarcerated there, they were forgotten, and their water system was no bottled water or anything too. So that's something as we push for more equitable and just systems. And then health. Water contamination results in multiple negative impacts, whether it's through drinking water or fishery. Flooding disasters can result in injury or death, displacement from flooding disasters or sea level rise, and again, water shutoffs. So how can we be a part of transformational change? We should move to publicly owned water, put a moratorium on industries polluting our waterways, disallowing the privatization of water, and changing our current systems. And how can we place equity at the epicenter of water in the Great Lakes, promote local control, local decision-making, local ownership, which also includes something that we have been trying to support and insert somewhat collectively with the community of East Chicago, is like having the listening session, having them make their decisions. We put a report together that was predominantly what they said that they needed and what they wanted. And so community planning and leadership is highly important in moving us toward better water systems. Oops. Well, I guess that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Could you give us a kind of step-by-step account of what happened in East Chicago and the role or lack of a role by now Vice President Pence?
Well, the community of East Chicago has basically hosted lead contamination and copper smelters and arsenic for over 40 years. It was not until one in 2011, the ASTD agency had put out a report in 2011 that said that all of the children in East Chicago, that their lead levels were acceptable and that it was okay to live and breathe and play in that community. Several years later, I believe 2015 or 2016, there was ongoing remediation by the Environmental Protection Agency, and Mayor Copeland was later given a report that showed that the lead levels in the soil were like 98,000 parts per a million, when the standard is 400 parts per a million. And the community is actually calling for, as the remediation occurs, to remediate to 100 parts per a million. Also, the toxic level within Miss Akeisha Daniels' home, just inside her home, was 32,000 parts per a million inside her home. Later, the mayor decided that the West Calumet, they defined it into 3 different zones, zone 1, 2, and 3. They decided to basically clear out the entire zone 1, or the West Calumet public housing complex, and said that it was unlivable, that the children's blood levels were, the children's blood level were 7 times the Center of Disease Control's reference amount, which is 5 deciliters, which no amount of lead is acceptable to the human body. And so the mayor said, hey, that's it. We're going to destroy this complex and move everyone out, which, I mean, it was already a crisis, but that like really spurred it into what seemed seemingly more of a crisis because people were displaced. And not only that, people that are living in public housing and therefore low income. And so I believe there may still be around 20 to 30 or less residents remaining. And from there, it became declared a disaster of emergency by Governor Eric Holcomb. There was no time to address your specific inquiry around now Vice President Pence. At the time, Governor Pence made no visit to this East Chicago community, predominantly 92% people of color. He made no visit, and to my knowledge, no mention, although he did visit other declared disaster areas within the state. Much to Governor Holcomb's credit, he has declared a state an emergency for the city. He's extended it a couple of times. I know the community has asked that, and in our NAACP report, that it just be no extension, that it just be considered a disaster, an emergency disaster area with no defined dates. So right now, again, the local board of East Chicago has approved the funding to fund the water infrastructure. So the city is on board on providing the funding to improve their water system. But the lead contamination is a whole nother story. Most of the community wants to be able to have people live back in that area. Right now, that area is extremely contaminated. No one should live there. So unless there are some really rigorous remediation processes that takes place. But my understanding that there are interests to have redevelopment occur there. There are challenges around, that people in the West Calumet have been moved, but not people in the Zone 2 that live in houses versus the people in the apartments. So you still have people in Zone 2 that are living in soil contamination as well as drinking contaminated water or having to live with bottled water, bathing in bottled water, using filtration systems until however long it takes to rebuild their water infrastructure. Also, there's questions around, is it beyond the Superfund site? Is it the entire city of East Chicago that needs to have its entire water system revamped? So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you for your talk, and these are really major issues around water, and they have consequences moving forward because, my concern is it builds a distrust in our water system, and then we end up with a kind of cyclical situation where we're talking about non-privatization of water, but people become reliant on water. And how do we rebuild trust after these kinds of situations to get people back onto the public water systems so that we don't increase demand for that water that's being bottled. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I only have what the NAACP advocacy says that, like Detroit did, created a water board. So there needs to be where community is involved on the water decisions, and community should work toward a public water system, one that involves, decisions need to be human-centered. All of our new decisions going forward should be based on my work and learning has been that they should be all human-centered. When you involve the humans and the ones that are most impacted, then you'll receive the most favorable decisions. So local decisions with the community.
My question is about the entire region of Northwest Indiana, Hammond, Gary, some of the parts of Southeast Chicago also. Are these communities also impacted by the same things that are happening in East Chicago specifically? And is there collaborative efforts between those communities also to build sort of a coalition in the area to make sure what happens in East Chicago doesn't trickle out into Gary and Hammond and all those other surrounding communities?
So I've not researched the Gary Hammond area or worked in that space, but what I can say systemically and historically and across the nation, right, there's this pattern of communities of color that are negatively impacted with their water and other systems. And then also people of color tend to live in old housing stock for many reasons, unable to move, that type of thing. And so if you're living in old housing stock built before 1952, then the pipe infrastructure most likely is lead. You should be able to get free water testing from your water company. Also, houses built, I believe, after 1950 something, but before 1980 something, are made with lead and copper smolderings. So one might have a concern there to be tested. The case of East Chicago was that there was a lead smelter. So if you're living in an area that had industrial site, which I think Gary is highly industrial community. Hammond once had the, can't think of the coal fire plant that was there that was shut down, the state line. So if you're living in those areas where contamination has sunk into your soil, sunk into your water, then yes, that's where we want to promote relationships with academia, like the university here, Illinois, Chicago. Community can reach out to these institutions and say, I want you to research this in my community. That's something the NAACP, through my personal work, and I'm sure through Jackie Patterson's national level, I do all the time. I have a college right now that wants me to tell them what I want them to research. So I'll probably go ahead and have them research on water impacts on people of color in the state of Indiana, because that data most likely does not exist. So we have to create the data, we have to create the science, and then bring voice to that data and that research and that science.
Thank you so much for coming to Chicago, Denise. It's funny, I literally was just about to ask that. I was like, hey, academia. So maybe if you could expound a little bit on opportunities for those that are scholars in the room. What are some areas of need that you believe the NAACP would benefit from in terms of how we would approach studies, right? So, and not just within the sense of ecology and biology, but also considering my, colleague here, the humanities. So I think everybody has something to contribute. So what are some areas of need that you would say are high priority if people were looking to possibly collaborate or begin to ask some questions that turn into studies, and then possibly not just at the city level, but then expanding that to the Blacks in the basin, right? So at the large scale level, as well as community and city level.
Well, there's a lot of research that can be done. I can't think right off the top of my head, but I can say, as it relates to the East Chicago toxic crisis report that we put together, I mean, it's everything from the people that have left, creating a registry for them to be able to communicate with each other on what is occurring. It's everything from someone following them up on their health and their life, and how many people have Lou Gehrig's disease now because they lived, in the lead contaminated. How are the children that, generations going 40 years back, how do you get research on how those people are doing now and where they're at, and their ability, are they in the prison system? There needs to be data and research around that. There should be data and research around the children right now whose IQ levels have been impacted, and what kind of resources are they getting to support them and to help keep them from the school to prison pipeline. There are people like Maritza Lopez that has publicly shared that her body her bones are lead poisoned. And one of the institutions one of the academia came in with some type of bone scanning system to help give her more information so she can better, advocate for her own health. How much remediation of the soil could actually be done? What are the impacts on their breathing, the people that are still living there, and the people that are bathing in water that's contaminated? They do not have a filtration system. What's the psychology, Quinn, on people that have to use bottled water every day, to bathe and to live in the fear of not having, the basic human right of clean water, So I think there's just massive quantities of research. We could provide you with a list that's already been put together. We could certainly email that.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to ask a question about the slide presentation when you spoke about, I believe it was Indianapolis, where it was that concentrated large area that it was maybe over 90% a black community, but it would take several, maybe 20 years to investigate. Can you speak further on whether they have started that investigation, and because that probably will take a lot of money, and what is the reality that could happen? Thank you.
The scenario right now is that the EPA and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management drew up a memorandum of understanding that EPA is no longer going to handle the cleanup. And then there were a lot of private companies, and also I believe under the Pence administration there was an increase in the budget to IDEM for the purpose of remediating the area. Again, there was a $60 to $70 million development that's to occur in that area. But still, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and EPA say it's a long process. Some of the things that we did was to say that the community needs to have a community benefit agreement, that the community should be involved throughout the process. So there's still a debate on who community is. How do we define community? The community that lives closest to that plume believe that they're the main stakeholders because of their proximity to the toxins in the land, but it actually impacts over 55,000 people as it relates to their drinking water, and not knowing where the contamination is actually coming from. So they're supposed to start a community involvement piece where they'll have public hearing, and community can continue to weigh in on, how rapidly could this occur, what would deter this from going any faster. But it's already been stated, it's over 238 sites So it's going to be a long, long time. And the community, again, but through narratives from corporations and politicians, convinced the community that it was not in their best interest to have it as a Superfund site and for them to continue to host that pollution.
Hello, thank you so much for coming here today. I'm going to ask you, can you provide any insights or things that you learned when you did the forums about bridging the gap and just energy and everything? Those sound like wonderful forums. And I'm sure that you learned as well as the people that came to those forums. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes, well, we just took the great research and policies from the NAACP, which anyone can go to those sites and go to the Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And on there, we have the Just Energy, Reducing Pollution and Creating Jobs report. And we just took that, and because there was well, I live in the community, and I had a relationship with a church that was only 3 miles from the Indianapolis Power and Light at that time that was burning coal. And so we had a town hall to discuss the impact on children and their health, the asthma and so forth. And also we had political leaders that, are responsible for that district. And so we just created a conversation and we lifted the narrative of that report and what it said about how 68% of African Americans live within a 3-mile radius of a coal-fired power plant. And then we just continued to give voice to that report. Also, there's the cold-blooded report. And then the Bridging the Gap, Connecting the Black Community to the Green Economy is another report from the national office. So we hosted a forum with that theme, and we brought in folks that have aquaponic systems and hydroponic systems. We brought in solar industry, someone out of Wisconsin at the time came in with their solar system. They had a sovereignty type of methodology. And so we just had sharing and learning. We had all different types of speakers to begin to engage at that time the members of the NAACP and any of our community that wanted to be there to learn about what we need to do, which is to transition to this new green economy that makes our air and our water and our land, far better and more livable.
Hi, thank you so much, Denise. I just wanted to make a short comment about the drinking water situation in East Chicago, just to clarify, because I think it's such a cautionary tale of what's happening, not just in Northwest Indiana, but throughout the country. East Chicago, of course, has been plagued with, as Denise has described in detail, legacy of contamination from facilities, and the soil has been contaminated. But the drinking water issue is really separate and apart from the soil contamination, and it's something that is potentially impacting all communities. It wasn't until EPA stepped in and did a pilot study to determine whether the soil excavation would result in dislodging of lead in the water. And so if it weren't for EPA coming in and actually doing a pilot study, nobody would have even known that the drinking water was contaminated. And EPA concluded that based on just testing 43 homes, that 40% of those homes had elevated levels of lead. And that they concluded that it was citywide and it was not just on the Superfund site. So, this is alarming because, again, the only reason EPA came in and did that study that revealed the elevated levels of lead is because they were concerned about whether the soil contamination would impact the water. So I just highlight that because I think it's important. East Chicago is just it's a disgrace, but it's also not isolated and it's happening all over the country. And I think what we need to really be mindful of when we're talking about drinking water is about accountability, it's about transparency, and it's about the existing rules that really need to be strengthened, because East Chicago, as the city claims and the state claims, they were not in violation of the existing laws, and that is just terrifying. So thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add to that too, another scenario that impacted the water was the fact that over 1,000 people were no longer using the water system, which apparently threw off the way they measure and put chemicals, something called ostrophosphate or something. Okay, what is orthophosphate? And so that impacted the pipes and thus the drinking water, because there weren't not as much water flow. So I guess we have to be cognizant of those, and I don't know why agencies like the EPA and the water company weren't already proactively aware that was going to happen when they were displacing those families.
Much. I'm wondering whether NCAA, a law around the entire basin, whether other chapters aren't also pressing forward on this, and whether there couldn't be a unified voice there around for speaking and advocating for the Great Lakes region.
Well, just to clarify, we're the NAACP, which is the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, and I by no means want to say that we are the champions in the East Chicago community. We are only offering what we can offer, and to the community's great credit, they have been very much self-organized through groups called Community Strategy Group, Community Advisory Group, the Calumet Lives Matter Group, the Northwest Interfaith Federation, and the Twin City Ministerial Alliance. And there's probably others. And we like to think that we are attempting to move collectively and offer what the NAACP can offer, which we can offer a lot, whether it's just bringing awareness to it for however many numbers of days that media will cover it, whether it's us making a phone call to a major corporation to say, we need bottles of water, and they say, we want to give you 100 cases, and we'll continue to give you as many cases as you want, or whether it be the Pure company that when we made the phone call said, we will give you 100 filtration systems. So we just have the power of the NAACP because we are global, we are national, and so we just want to use that however the community wants to utilize us. And we have the brilliance, I can't say enough, and I'm sorry she wasn't here, the great Jackie Patterson, who does phenomenal research. She does it instantaneously, so she put this report together. I'm great at putting engagements together and collaborating and organizing, and then she lifts what she hears and puts it into great research and reports and action steps. And so we will try to implement this report, but we want to only implement it if the community wants us to implement it, along with these what we call the EPA environmental justice demands that we've asked for an executive order on behalf of communities like East Chicago. But we will only do pretty much what the community wants to move with us collectively to assist them in their becoming whole.
So you mentioned this demand to the EPA for this executive order. How confident are you about this administration following through with this, considering their track record with issues like this?
Well, I'd say not so much a question of confidence, but that this has been an administration that thrives on issuing executive orders. So why not issue an executive order on behalf of communities like East Chicago that gives them clean water? So yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Brenda Scott Henry, and I'm from the city of Gary, Indiana. And I thank Denise for putting on this, making this presentation. But the issue in East Chicago is more critical than you could even imagine. I would call them the perfect storm of lead contamination. It's in their air, their land, and in their water. So we have a regional policy council in the NERPC, we call them, Northwest Indiana Regional Policy Council. And I brought the issue up several times about what are we going to do around improving the awareness to residents, especially in the Gary, Hammond, and East Chicago area, because we are that urban hub where you have the largest population of minorities, not only African Americans, but we're talking about Hispanic population, which consists of East Chicago primarily. But we could use the support of, I want to say that there may be a distrust in government among the local citizens, but we still need them in terms of helping us to get the word out and do more public awareness and do more organizing on the ground and informing citizens about what they can do in the interim while government or whomever is trying to resolve these issues. But we need people to, we could really use the academia support in terms of putting facts and figures to the social issues that we are experiencing.
Thank you.